What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Boys Do Sports. Today I've got my starts and sits for week 3, and then we'll also go over some defenses that I like and don't like. To get it started, we got start Dak Prescott, quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, this game is going to be a shootout. We all know it. Both teams have terrible pass defenses. Both have injuries in the secondary. The Bears allow 28.6 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, which is the most. Goff just threw for 334 yards against the Bears, and Dak is coming off a 361-yard passing game. Dak has plenty of weapons to throw to, and Jalen Johnson is expected to miss the game. Next, we got running back Jordan Mason. It's about time. It's his time to shine. Aaron Jones just went on IR. J.J. McCarthy's not going to be in there. They're running backup quarterback. He's in line for a massive workload against this Bengals defense that allows 26.1 fantasy points per game to running backs, which is the third most. With the backup quarterback playing, like I said, they could definitely end up just controlling the clock, keeping the ball away from the Bengals, because you know the Bengals are still going to be super explosive with all those offensive playmakers. Control the ball, let Jordan Mason just run the clock out. I think it'll be a really good game for him. Touchdown or two. He's even shown that he can do some in the passing game. So give me Jordan Mason. At wide receiver, Rome Odunze. I don't know if he is some of your guys' wide receiver 3, then you're starting him anyway. But if he's not, he needs to be. He is the wide receiver 4 in fantasy points currently, and could easily be the wide receiver 1 after this week. He's only like 4 points short of Puka Nacua, who's the wide receiver 1. And like we talked about with Dak, this game is going to be a shootout. The Cowboys are allowing 38.2 fantasy points per game to wide receivers, which is like the 4th most. And DaRon Bland is not playing. So Odunze is also tied for first in touchdowns and 6th in targets among wide receivers. Last tight end, we got Juwan Johnson. The Seahawks are sticklers against wide receivers, but allow the most fantasy points per game to tight ends. And Juwan Johnson leads all tight ends in targets and is the tight end 2 on the season. He is averaging almost 16 fantasy points per game, which is what the Seahawks are averaging letting up to tight ends. And the offense could absolutely run through him this week, and he could have a tight end finish overall 1. We'll get into our sits. This one's going to be controversial, but what's the point of talking about sits if you're not picking somebody that's not obvious? Same thing we do with starts. Jalen Hurts at quarterback. The Rams have not allowed a 200-yard passer yet, and Jalen Hurts is averaging 126 passing yards per game. We all know it hasn't been pretty. The Rams also allow a league-low 9.8 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, which Hurts just scored 11 last week. The Chiefs were able to hold him to 15 rushing yards and 11.5 fantasy points, like I said, and half of Jalen Hurts' fantasy points have come just from rushing touchdowns. Total up his rushing touchdowns, take away the fantasy points from that, that's half of his fantasy points. I think he's got 3 or 4 on the year. And I think if the Rams can keep him from running in for a touchdown, keep that to Saquon or something, he's going to have a really bad week. Unless for some reason they start throwing the ball like crazy, but the Rams just haven't allowed it. At running back, we got J.K. Dobbins. The Chargers allow just 9.2 fantasy points per game to running backs, which is the second lowest so far this season. It's a pretty tough defense. They also haven't allowed a touchdown to a single running back. So, I don't know, but that defense is going to be tough to run against, and honestly, this Broncos offense have not looked good. J.K. Dobbins is not involved in the passing game and has only played 45% of the snaps last week and like 50% the week before. And R.J. Harvey's snap share will continue to rise, and they have been using Tyler Beatty in the passing game. So, trio of running backs, not good for fantasy football. At wide receiver, we got Chris Olave. Had a pretty decent 2 weeks. but I think it's about time to see some bad things out of Rattler. I know I said Juwan Johnson's going to be good, but the Seahawks defense is much tougher against wide receivers. They've somehow only allowed 11 catches to wide receivers total this season, over 2 games. They also allow the least amount of fantasy points per game to wide receivers, and it's not very much. It's already hard enough to trust that Rattler can support Olave in this offense to be a fantasy viable wide receiver. The Seahawks corners, Reek Woolen and Devon Witherspoon, are a super elite duo and are going to lock down Olave. At tight end, it's hard to say, but I went with Evan Ingram. He's pretty much droppable at this point, though, and if you're having to start him, don't go pick up someone off the waiver. He isn't playing a full-time role in this offense, and he honestly just might not be healthy. May never be healthy this season. He's missed all the practices so far this week, and there's not a lot of tight ends that are sit-worthy this week, but this tight end fantasy landscape is awful. We're losing everybody. Kittle goes down week 1. Kraft might be out for a couple weeks. We don't know. We don't know what that is yet. But that's all for my starts and sits for the offensive positions. We'll go over some defenses. Now, here are my favorites, but these ones are obvious starters. The Vikings versus the Bengals. The Vikings have a tough defense. Could get a lot of turnovers out of Jake Browning. Seahawks versus the Saints, like we talked about it. Seahawks aren't letting up a lot of points. Saints aren't scoring a lot of points. Packers versus Browns. Packers look like the best defense in the league, and the Browns are a turnover machine. Texans versus the Jags. The Jags are a pretty decent offense, but the Texans have a really good defense and have been scoring pretty well. Here's some less owned teams to start if you don't have any of those top tier teams. Maybe these guys are still on the waiver. I know for sure the Falcons probably are. They're playing the Panthers, and the Falcons defense really stood up against the Vikings. Pretty happy with them. Patriots versus the Steelers. Patriots defense going to score well, get lots of sacks. Chargers defense versus the Broncos. Broncos are looking terrible. Colts defense versus the Titans. Start defenses against the Titans. You're going to come up with some points. Buccaneers versus the Jets. Backup quarterback. Bucs defense is tough. Those are all pretty well under 30% rostered. Might be able to pick one of them up if you have one of them, or if you don't have one of the studs. Here are my highly owned defenses to avoid. Broncos against the Chargers. Broncos defense has not looked that great. So Chargers are mowing everyone over. Ravens versus the Lions. Lions can score a lot of points. Ravens defense is for some reason still 95% owned and have been got really shit on week 1. Got lucky week 2 they didn't get lucky. They played the Browns, so I don't know. Bad team. They scored well, but Steelers versus Patriots. Steelers defense isn't looking good, so I'd avoid them this week. They're still super owned. But yeah, guys, that's all for my starts and sits. Good luck this week with your fantasy matchups, and thanks for watching.